Okay, so I've had several up-and-coming LMs ask me a bit about just LM stuff in general, and I decided to just make a video that covers it all so I can just use that as a reference. I'm going to start with traits, so just so we can explain everything. This is my normal Remerkant build. Let's go over the basic stuff that you need for Yellow Line. So Firelore, Frostlore, the two basic debuffs that the Lore Master has. Frostlore for tactical damage, Firelore for melee damage. You want to spec into them fully. These other traits make it so that when you use a skill of a particular type, so like fire, lightning, or frost, there is an extra debuff that gets applied for 15 seconds. We can go over those in a bit. And then this makes it so that Windlore, this skill, reapplies and spreads Firelore and Frostlore. I have seen in the past people waiting for Firelore and Frostlore to expire in order to reapply them. That is not the way to do it. The way to do it is you just apply both and then you spam Windlore. I take Stormlore. This is just a stun that is pretty useful. I put 3 points into it because as you can see I'm taking Lightning Storm, so I take lightning damage. Um, this is good for the bursts in Rem, but that's not part of the core Yellow Line build. Mending Lore to just make your healing better, but more importantly to give the plus 5% incoming healing to Water Lore, which is here. As you can see, plus 5% incoming healing modifier. It's pretty good on tanks. Mostly not something you're going to be using in Raze just because you have so much else to do, but you know, good to have anyway. Ancient Craft, this is one of the most OP debuffs in the game. You want to have it up every time people need to like burst damage. Ancient Craft will do so much for your DPS, especially these days where we're taking a lot of physical damage. Doesn't do as much for tactical because it's an armor debuff, but it does so much for physical. This is just longer stuns from Grace Period. It's useful. Basically, Grace Period means from the moment you apply a crowd control that would be broken, it has 3 seconds during which it can't be broken. So if you see, Blinding Flash there says a 30-second daze, 100% chance to break on damage after 3 seconds. The after 3 seconds is because of this trait. Otherwise, it would say just 100% of chance to break on damage. And then Ancient Master is really good. Will allow you to debuff, like when the tank pulls a big group of enemies, you just use Ancient Master, and then you use Firelore, Frostlore. It's basically just for those skills. We don't take Enfeeble. Enfeeble is broken. If you take Enfeeble, the first 10 seconds of their cast, Ancient Craft will be weaker. So you shouldn't take Enfeeble. Now, we spec into Blue Line, particularly for Catmint. If you don't take Lightning Storm, I have a build without Lightning Storm. Let me show you it. Whoa, this takes a while. Okay, if you don't take Lightning Storm, you can take extra Induction Reduction, which is what I'm going to use now to show you guys. I don't put the 3 points into Stormlord, because why should I if I'm not doing lightning damage anyway? And yeah, you still take Catmint, you get more tankiness, which is really good. Now I'm going to demo a bit of what you want to do to get all your debuffs on LM. So I'm going to use a trained in dummy. Let's go over all the debuffs you have on the LM itself. So you have Firelore and Frostlore, as we've gone through. We have Sign of Power command. This one should be up on all times, because you see, it's a really short cooldown and it's a super long duration. You should have the legacy for this, I believe. Yeah, Sign of Power durations plus 35. So if you have the legacy, it makes it a lot easier. It applies to several targets at the same time. You can normally use it once a while in the middle of the fight. Sign of Power CL ends, it is actually very lackluster. I'll use it every so often, but it's not a big deal. You reduce the crit rating on the enemy. Of course, it'll stay up 100% of the time, which is good, but it's the debuff is so small. Knowledge of the Lore Master, if you get to use it, if the enemy is red barred outside of combat, like right now I'm out of combat, which means it does apply. It is a pretty decent debuff, but it's hard to find the situation where you can use this out of combat, right? So you can actually get, because if you're in combat, you can still get the analysis details, but you don't get the debuff in. And as we've talked, we've got Ancient Craft for the armor value, and then there's Tar and Circle, which basically one reduces fire mitigation, and the other one does plus 10% incoming tactical damage and the 2% miss chance. Normally you use it for the tactical damage, really. The slow movement speed is mostly irrelevant for raids. You mostly just use it for the fire mitigation. Okay, those are the debuffs that are on the Lore Master that the Lore Master has. Of course, there's Wind Lore, which was plus 1% incoming damage, but you mostly use it just to spread Fire Lore and Frost Lore. Now let's go over what these do. So when is it important to use one or the other? For instance, if Shelob is coming down, you normally want to, like she goes up during the fight, then she comes down again. When she comes down, you Frost Lore her immediately because her aura is tactical. Then you Fire Lore her so that when she hits the tank, she doesn't murder him. So like if you're thinking about priority, when should I Frost Lore first? When should I Fire Lore first? You should think of which enemies are going to hit you tactical first and then physical, or physical, like melee first and then tactical. Then if you're looking at the other ones, which are priority, like if you're late, if like they're about to Oathie now, they're using Oathies and you haven't gotten your debuffs up, Ancient Craft, all the time. Ancient Craft is your best debuff. Then you look, if you have a lot of Rune Keepers, you can go for Circle. If you have Hunters, you want Tar. And then you go into Pet debuffs. And that's what we're going to go in now. So those are the debuffs that are on the Lore Master. So let me actually just show you a bit of, let's say I do Fire Lore, Frost Lore, and then I do Wind Lore. They're both at 45 seconds. I do my Sign of Power command, Sign of Power Seal Land. I might do Tar and Circle. And let's say I'm getting prepped. Oh, let me actually turn these options so I can actually see my own debuffs. There we go. And I use Ancient Craft. So he's got all the debuffs that I can use. This is from the Big Battle set. This is actually really nice if you want to get it. These things from Big Battles are pretty decent for when you have a bunch of RKs. So these are all the debuffs you can apply as a Lore Master. As you can see, sometimes I also use Wind Lore and then use Wizard's Fire, because we were going to explain this actually, weren't we? The extra debuffs that you get from using an elemental skill after using Fire Lore and Frost Lore, the fire ones are generically just better. Unless you're up against a ranged enemy, in which case you want to do lightning for the minus 50% range damage. The rest of the time, just use fire. So it's good to get in the habit of doing Wind Lore, Wizard's Fire. And then you're set. Now he's got not only the minus 35% melee damage, minus 30% tactical damage, but also plus 20% inductions and plus 15% attack duration, which is a ton, especially combined with the other 15% attack duration from Sign of Power command. Okay, LM is a rather complex class. So let's say you've applied all your LM debuffs, the ones that are on your actual Lore Master, but now you got to move on to the pets. So what do the pets do? Let's start with the Raven. Benediction of the Raven, minus 10% fire mitigation. So the way I have it set up is that every pet has the skill I wanted to use on the boss on auto fire. So see, I right click it. It's no longer, it doesn't any longer have that dotted outline. I'll right click it again. Now it has a dotted outline. What this means is that when I command attack, I have command attack keybound to one of my keys I use all the time. So what I just do is I summon my Raven and I command attack on my enemy, and the first thing he'll do is use Benediction of the Raven. So basically, I'll use Catmint to double the effect of Benediction of the Raven. So you see, I use Catmint. This goes up to 20%. I use Benediction of the Raven, and then I dismiss my Raven. Now he's got minus 20% fire mitigation. Then I'll summon my bear. I'll command attack with my bear. Now he's got minus 10% incoming melee and range damage. Then I'll summon my Bog Guardian. If I don't lag, I'll command attack. Plus 5% incoming ranged critical chance, and I'll summon my healing pet. I'll use Catmint. I'll command attack. On any damage, return 10% of damage. This means DPS will heal themselves when attacking. So, Catmint only affects the Raven and the healing pet, so that's why I only use it for those. I also have the set from Remarkand that makes, here we go, Catmint cooldown decreased by 30 seconds, which means I can use it way more often than, it's a 45-second cooldown normally, naturally, but it's a 15-second cooldown for me with the set. So, sorry, I had to drink water. So, I get to use it on the Raven, then twice on the Spirit, then once on the Raven, then twice, because the Raven debuff is 1 minute and 10 seconds, right? No, 1 minute. So I'd be using Catmint, every third Catmint I use it for the Raven. Normally I'd have it for 4, but I want to do it, that would be if I use Catmint exactly on cooldown, which I do not. So let's actually go into a real fight scenario, right? So I debuff everything correctly. Let's say I want to use the Raven now. I pop the Raven. Then I bring my bear out. And while the bear is attacking, I can use some other skills. I dismiss my bear. I use my Bog Guardian. I use the Bog Guardian's ability. I dismiss my Boggy. I summon my healing pet. I use Catmint. I use my healing pet. And now it's got all buffs up. But the first one, so one thing you gotta keep in mind is Raven has double the duration as the rest. So you use Raven half the time. So use Raven, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet, Raven, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet, Bog Guardian, Healing... yeah. I don't know if that made sense. Basically, every rotation skips the Raven once. So I just used Catmint Healing Pet, so I can't do the Raven just yet, but I can do it now. So let's say I go for the Raven. I'm talking, which also makes it less than ideal. But anyway, as you can see, you can keep up all these debuffs while at the same time doing your pet rotation. What did I summon? Fuck, I fucked up. And yeah, and at the same time spamming Windlore, so, oh, it got me out of combat at Green Bard. Anyway, so you can see I spam Windlore to keep up Firelore, Frostlore. I keep up the pets. I try to do, so Raven, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet, and then I'd go back to Raven, but then I wouldn't have Catmint. So, so probably you want to go like Bear, Bog Guardian, Raven, Bear, Bog Guardian, Healing Pet. Something like that. I never figured out an exact rotation because really as an LM, I don't, like, it's really hard to make a fixed rotation. Because in some fights you gotta crowd control something, in some fights you gotta debuff several groups, some fights you just are gonna have to sacrifice one of the pets because you just don't have the time to do everything. And you just, if you try to do everything, you end up fucking up. So it's better to just commit to doing less, but doing the most important things. So let's say I would give you a priority order of what's the most important. So the most important is by far Firelore, Frostlore. And Sign of Power command is actually pretty important in my eyes, and it's also super easy to use. You can use it on the move, unlike all the other skills, which also makes it hard for LM, because sometimes it's not only that you need to use lots of skills in a short time, it's also that you need to reposition, and you can't use any skills while you reposition, which completely fucks you over. But Sign of Power Command and Wizard's Fire and Sign of Power CLNs are some of the skills you can use while moving. Now, as for pets, normally the bear is the most important one. in some scenarios, the healing pet. Um, Remember, bear is plus 10% incoming damage from melee and ranged. So even if you have like two hunters, I'd say that, well, the other DPS, well, it depends on how much damage each is doing, but you'd be affecting the warden, the champs, the burglars, the captain with the bear, and you'd only be affecting the hunter or the fire arcades, which you shouldn't be taking these days anyway, with the raven. And then the Bog Guardian only affects the hunter and some warden skills, so that's not really that crucial. The reflect healing is super important for some situations. You'd learn this with experience. For instance, boss 2, if he does his gas attack, well, everybody gets a little um, dot. It's really important to use this. Everybody, all the DPS will keep itself topped off. So I'd say in priority list you go Fire Lore, Frost Lore, Sign of Power, then Ancient Craft, by far the most important of the offensive debuffs. I'd call defensive or damage mitigating buffs, Frost Lore, Fire Lore, and the two Sign of Powers. Everything else is offensive, except maybe the Healing Pet. That's why the Healing Pet sometimes gets jumped up. But of the offensive ones, by far Ancient Craft is the best. Probably Bear second, probably Raven third, then Tar Circle, and Boggy last. And Healing Pet, situational. But that's the thing about Lore Master and why it's so hard a class to like pick up initially, because it has a lot of judgment calls during fights, and you need to make the right judgment call. To sometimes you got to decide what debuff am I not going to be putting right now, and fucking up that call might make the group wipe. So, and trying to do too much might make you drop something that is actually super important and might also make the group wipe. Um, so yeah, there was a sort of a rundown. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. I know I'm not the best at explaining this just because it's implicit to me. It's just natural. I've just played it so much that it's hard for me to put into words sometimes. But yeah, that's it.